back to Comic Time. I'm David.
And I'm Jet.
And this time we're finally doing the question number 2. We're picking back up with the old question series by Denny O'Neil and Dennis Cowan. This is a pretty good issue. I read through it not long before we did this video to kind of remind myself. And this is kind of the issue that you're going to get to see the question really become the hero he was meant to be. This is the character that you want to be seeing. So we can get right into it. Do you have any questions before we begin? Yeah, you can ask whatever you want.
Slightly unrelated to the book itself, on the very back cover, there's an ad for like a Star Trek.
Why am I sitting over there?
I have no idea. There's an ad for like a Star Trek book that DC did.
Oh, this.
But it has an ad that says Who's Who in Star Trek. The Who's Who books are like almost like a pseudo encyclopedia they used to do, where it would cover like the different superhero origins. I didn't know they did that for Star Trek. I was just wondering, had you noticed this ad, and did you know that they had done that?
No, see, I don't know anything about these Who's Who Star Trek books. Looking through some of these other ads we got here.
Let's see. This ad in the back
unrelated,
is
but
talking about the Legends event.
Legends crossovers.
Mm-hmm.
No, you probably know more about this if you had anything to comment on it than I did, because I wouldn't have had anything to say about it. Well, if we want to get into it then, I guess we already talked about the origins of the character in the last issue, so following up with what happened last time, if you remember, he was thrusted into the water after being, beaten pretty much to death by Lady Shiva and the Reverend's goons. So presumably he would be dead from all that. And the first few panels of the series, and you can start looking through that if you want to, it kind of just does the old classic, floating towards the light situation when somebody is dying. You picture yourself going towards the light. But what I like about how they do it in the question is, as he's going towards the light, it mentions a comment here, if the dead could cry, he would be. When it starts pulling him back away from the light, as he realizes he's actually not dying here. And so to me, that kind of tells me that the question was almost suicidal to a point, as it seems like it's trying to suggest that he was saddened when he realized that he was being pulled away from the light instead of, completely dying. And he awakes sometime later. The next page will tell you. So he wakes from a comatose state after about a week. And after being pulled away from the light that he was floating towards, he awakes to, it says here, pain, as he is now in excruciating pain and sweating profusely. It will also tell us shortly here that he's broken, over half of the bones in his body.
I really like the art on the page where he's floating toward the light. It has almost like a dimpled effect, the way they're trying to illustrate everything. You didn't mention he sees like this woman's face and he doesn't know who the woman is, like as he's like floating, I guess, away from the light. You see, he's like,
Who is she?
Yeah.
I don't want to say for certain. I could be wrong here. I think this is Lady Shiva.
Oh,
I think he's getting a flash of her face, because on the this isn't a big spoiler because they tell you almost immediately. Lady Shiva is the one who dives into the water and saves him.
What?
Mm-hmm.
She was the one who.
I know, he says that too to her when eventually she comes back to see him again. He's like, why would you save me? And even in this, you don't get a complete answer. She does kind of give you a little taste of an explanation. But what we do learn pretty quickly on is he'll wake up here. It's been about a week that he's been comatose, and the first face he's met with is Aristotle. his friend. We'll see here that the question has lost his memory. He doesn't know who Aristotle is. He doesn't even know his own name. All he seems to remember is being beaten up and thrown into the water by Shiva. We'll follow up with the fact that a note was left with the question. In addition, after being saved, a note was left with Aristotle. It was written in Mandarin, which neither of them can read. But Aristotle seems to have looked into it enough to be able to say that, well, it's actually relatively basic letter. It's just kind of coordinates, and it's telling you to go to them. And he says that the Lady Shiva is the one who left this note for him. There are some interesting things that the question and Aristotle will talk about while he's bedridden here as well. He questions how he could have survived after having, drowning underwater for 10 minutes, let alone being, shot in the head and beaten up. Aristotle will give him explanations like, the diving reflex, saying that it's a very rare thing that can happen to people, only in cold weather where your brain will retain oxygen even if the rest of your organs are shutting down for long enough to survive a little bit longer. And he'll say, well, what about, getting shot in the head? There's no diving reflex that could have saved me from that. He explains to him that it was a kind of a cattle gun that's used for killing cattle, and it's a round smaller than a .22. It seemed like where they ended up shooting you, you just got lucky. It passed through kind of like the side of your skull, and didn't really damage any brain tissue. The question will respond with something like, I was wearing a mask too. Possibly slowed the slug, which was odd because you'd think that his mask is just some kind of thin putty. It's odd that he would mention his mask as being significantly dense enough to have any effect on any kind of bullet.
Real quick, jumping back to that last page. One thing that I noticed looking at the art, they did a trick that I learned about while reading Invincible, where this panel and this panel are literally the same panel. You just change the text a little bit.
Yes.
It looks like maybe the difference between the two panels, there's more pink room up here for them to fit more text.
Right. They just kind of added a little bit more panel up top to add in his
Larger
4
sketch
extra
mark.
lines. Yeah. But it does appear to be the exact same drawing.
I actually like it when comics do that. It saves time for the artist.
That's true. Makes it easier for everybody. This is more of a dialogue heavy scene, so you don't need to, have all of these extravagant drawings and change up the art every panel if you don't have to. So after this little brief conversation with Aristotle, we jump to this mansion. This mansion is kind of the hideout of the Reverend and the mayor and the goons. This is kind of where they all meet up. We see the mayor is just drunk and just belligerent. He's just sitting there in the chair, just kind of rambling to himself. The mayor, especially in this issue, you can tell is basically useless, and it's the Reverend just kind of pulling the strings in the city. And here they say something that you might be interested in, because in the last video you were mentioning how it was odd that they didn't just immediately connect that Vic Sage was the question. And the Reverend mentions that, and he's kind of here we're getting a news report of how Vic Sage has been missing for 6 days, and that would be at the same time when we killed the question. So it seems pretty clear to me that they're the same person. If they hadn't before, they certainly do realize that now, that they are in fact the same person. he does ask where Lady Shiva has gone, because she kind of disappeared after that night at the dock. They simply say that they don't know. He's curious about that, but they don't have like a read on her location. At this point, the Reverend's probably not really concerned about that. Like, she took care of the question for me. That's all I really needed her for. So after that realization by the Reverend there, that, you know, quick jump over there, we get a little dream sequence that I will go ahead and say. Turns out this isn't just a dream sequence. This is actually a memory of looks like a night that Batman met up with the Question, and they just happened to be at the same place at the same time, taking down some goons. And Batman is completely silent in this sequence, but the Question says, like, thanks for your help, although I didn't really need it. You know, the kind of the old Question from the previous issue, typical arrogant personality.
Quick commentary on the silent Batman segment. I do really like when comic books go with like the no text approach for panels and you just get like pure art. Another thing that I really like about it, I know you're not a big fan of the Batman, but it's got like the green sky. It's like a similar like cowl setup and stuff.
They're doing this kind of as, you know, in the past type imagery here, with the change up of coloring. A little bit of a green wash on everything. Kind of everybody's a little bit shadowy. And he seems to awake from a dream. He was dreaming about this, but this Batman will visit them here in a second and confirm that you know, that actually happened in the past. So this is canonically the Question and Batman's first meeting. And so the Question wakes up after dreaming about this first time that he met Batman. The lights will turn off here, and who else but Batman will show up in the darkness here and say that, you know, I'm the one who cut off the lights, and he's simply here to give the Question a message. He's not interested in Vic you know, responding or saying anything. He's like, I don't want to hear it from you. I might just go ahead and read most of what Batman says here. Of course, he references the first time they met when they were confronting these goons about a radium theft. But what Batman is here to say, he will basically, you know, say that the Vic is a fool. He's, you know, arrogant and incompetent, and he's, you know, he carelessly putting his life in danger without any like thought or purpose behind his actions. And he's, you know, it's clear that everything you're doing is just to feed your ego. And, you know, Vic tries to chime in and says like, hey, wait a minute. Batman just says, shut up. He said, you know, he says, you don't realize how valuable your life is, or how valuable anyone's life is. You know, so like, how dare you risk it so carelessly? You know, if you're going to do what I do, you have to put your whole life into it. You have to put everything into it. And you're over here acting like some kind of part-timer, you know, just, you know, fighting for your ego. And then he just says, if you're going to be like a vigilante or a crime fighter or a superhero, it's got to be who you are. And before Vic Sage can like respond or say anything, Batman is gone. He wasn't there to have a conversation with them. He was there to let him know that, hey, you fucked up, and don't let it happen again.
I really like Batman laying down the law like that. There are other instances of Batman doing things like that, but in less words. Like that time he knocked out Guy Gardner in like Justice League International. I like the art with how the blinds kind of shade the scenes. There are a lot of like overlapping stripes on top of the Question's face. One question that I wanted to ask, do they illustrate a difference in time between Batman's outfits in the dream sequence versus this? Or is he wearing similar clothes in both?
Well, you can't really tell in the dream sequence much, because of the colors are all muted and everything's washed in like shadow and greens. you can't really tell. But I would more or less looks like he's probably wearing a similar thing. Understand this version of the question hasn't been operating for very long. If it wasn't clear in the first issue how amateurish he was, and like I said, the only time he would have been seen before this series in the DC continuity would have been in Chicago for 1 or 2 missions with Blue Beetle. So he's pretty new. I don't think you would have had much of a change in Batman's outfit from the time that they first met to now, because that probably wasn't that long ago. It was a month or 2 at most.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it happened between the 2 Blue Beetle things in the first issue?
I think so. There's no mention that it would have been in Chicago, so I'm guessing it was sometime, shortly after he came back to Hub City.
Do you think Batman was in Hub City, or do you think the question was doing something in Gotham? It is kind of weird, since they're in different cities, for them to have crossed paths.
Probably Batman in Hub City. It's said somewhere in here a little bit later on, or actually almost the next panels or something. He's talking to Aristotle, questioning how did Batman know where I was, and Aristotle's like, maybe that first time you met him, he followed you home, and so he knows a lot more about you than you think. Maybe he, watches Vic Sage, on the news, and so he's been following your actions through the news as well. So either way, I think Batman went over to Hub City, if anything, perhaps to check in on the question, this amateur vigilante that he knows about who's putting himself and other people in danger over in Hub City, which seems to be what he's, mad about right now.
Did Batman put Lady Shiva up to saving him?
No. Lady Shiva chose to do that herself. It's interesting that we didn't get something like Batman being the one who dove into the water and saved the question. But no, it's made pretty clear Batman wasn't even there that night. He wasn't there. He wasn't going to be there to save the question. If anything, Batman just kind of says you were incredibly lucky to even be alive. But yeah, Lady Shiva chose to do that. Vic will follow up on the letter that Lady Shiva left with them, that is in Mandarin, that is coordinates saying to go to this location. Why she left it in Mandarin, I don't know. I'm not really sure. Maybe to kind of hide it as code from other eyes who weren't meant to see it. But Vic does not read that, so he had to take a moment to figure that out. Anyway, it seems she has even, Lady Shiva has even ordered a helicopter to pick him up when he's ready to go to this location, because the helicopter pilot mentioned something about the lady who chartered this kite gave me a complete flight plan and where to go and everything. I don't know what lady he would be talking about other than Lady Shiva, so that's kind of what I'm taking from that. You may be interested to hear where he's going. He's going to this more kind of secluded cabin. We're still somewhere in the United States, but a secluded cabin somewhere, and there is a man in a wheelchair up at the front of the cabin that Vic walks up to.
Doom Patrol stuff?
No.
Okay.
This is so the person that he sent here to meet is going to be kind of his trainer for the next little bit, and his trainer is going to be Richard Dragon, who is perhaps one of the only martial artists that would be superior to Lady Shiva. So Richard Dragon kind of just explains to him what you might be here to learn. Of course, Vic still kind of being Vic. He says, "What, I'm gonna learn martial arts from a guy in a wheelchair? No way, man." And then kind of he'll tell him that maybe learning from a guy in a wheelchair is your first lesson. Being able to learn from me. But kind of fast track through this, because this is only a short portion of this issue. They kind of do a training montage to get through this portion of this issue. Basically, what Richard Dragon teaches him is not martial arts. Richard Dragon is teaching him something that he thinks is more valuable to him right now in his life than martial arts, and it's kind of a way to keep his ego in check. He teaches him, about things like meditation and patience. He teaches him about, a better way to think about fighting than simply dishing out violence. In a funny way, kind of meta, like Dragon Ball related argument, he sort of teaches him a kind of like ultra instinct type mindset when it comes to fighting. He said, kind of like you're thinking too much when you're taking your actions in your fight. Your thought and your actions in the fight need to be one and the same. Like you need to be acting the moment you're thinking. It's not think then act. It's your actions are your thoughts. So we see all these images here, this kind of montage of him training. He's, getting in shape again, kind of, working off all of his injuries. He's learning about meditation. And by the end of it, Richard Dragon will eventually just tell him, it's time to go home. Like, you're done here. I'm not going to, teach you anything at the moment. And he's like, but I didn't learn anything about fighting. And he's like, that's not what I had chosen to teach you. He was trying to teach him kind of to change how he perceives himself and change how he perceives fighting. I do believe Richard Dragon will come up again later in the question series and he will learn more actual martial arts. But at this point in time, that's not what the question needed. So it's not as if after this, couple months or few months, whatever it was, montage, that he's all of a sudden, as good as Richard Dragon or better than Lady Shiva, but he is definitely a better version of himself than he was in the first issue. And of course, when he's about to start heading home, who else but Lady Shiva will come up out of the forest here and say like, oh, so, you met Richard Dragon here. What did he teach you? And it seems Richard Dragon and Lady Shiva have a bit of a disagreement on what it was that the question needed to learn. Because Lady Shiva thinks that Lady Shiva thinks that the question has potential as a martial artist. And she wanted him to learn more about martial arts. Richard Dragon thinks that he has potential as an investigator and as somebody who is inquisitive, or he said he had exceptional curiosity. So they kind of both disagree on what he needs to hone the most in terms of his skills. But I think at the end of the day, it's probably a little bit of both. It can be both at the same time.
Richard Dragon may also be aware that Shiva's going to try to box him anyway. Like, I don't have to teach you that part.
But anyway, in this sequence here, if you remember what happened in the first issue, the fight was very one-sided. He couldn't really do anything to her, but it seemed like just by Richard Dragon teaching him about changing his perception of fighting alone, he is at least able to defend against Lady Shiva's, attacks here. He's not really getting any hits in for real, but, and at the end of the day, Lady Shiva does, say that she was just testing him here. It seems like he's definitely better off than he was, both in mind and body.
It's weird to see his face for so much of the book.
Why? What is that?
I'm used to having no face.
It's interesting you say that, because he's about to cast off this Vic Sage, this Charles Zaz identity of himself. This was one of the things that he feels that he learned from Richard Dragon and changing his perception of himself. He has decided that who he is the question. Mm-hmm. That's who he wants to be. That's who he is. So he's kind of cast off these other identities within himself. And I did kind of want to mention before getting away from all this training stuff is, kind of at the end of their fight between Vic and Lady Shiva, she is talking to him about how she thinks her and Richard Dragon's perception of Vic is different. She was saying that she thinks that he has like a warrior spirit, and she could tell because he wasn't even hesitant to fight her again after she just almost killed him before. And he said, well, maybe I was just curious to see how I would do against you this time, referencing what Richard Dragon thinks is most important about the question. And so she kind of says that it seems that something Richard has kind of rubbed off on you a little bit. But I think both things are true at the end of the day. Really, I think he does have the warrior spirit that she sees, and he is a very curious person. He's very inquisitive, the inquisitive question. Anyway, he leaves that secluded cabin, and he goes back to his home, finds his old blue suit that the question wears, and he puts on his mask, and he said, this is what this feels like me. This feels like home, wearing the face again and the suit. This is who I am, and what does the question do? He pays a call on his killer to learn why they murdered him. So he goes home, dresses out, and he goes straight to work trying to figure out, what the Reverend is up to now. He makes quick work of the guards at the mansion that the Reverend is still at. Of course, this is one of the first guards he takes out is the same guy that participated in almost killing him at the docks. And again, this guy says it's the no-face guy, but I thought that we had killed him before. But I thought you were dead. Not this time, right? But it kind of ends. This issue ends with him, sneaking up on the Reverend in the mansion. And if I don't know that I mentioned it last time, but in the last issue, when they're trying to kill the question and kind of beating him to death there, the Reverend makes a comment saying like, well, cast him off into the water, to die. But if he, comes back onto land and walks up to me singing Danny Boy, I'll give him whatever he wants. Saying like, if he just like rejects, death, like perhaps Jesus, then I'll do whatever he wants. And so I don't know how the question would have heard him say that, considering he would have been like unconscious, being beaten to death at that time.
And he has amnesia.
He also has amnesia from all that, but what else does he do as he's sneaking up on the Reverend? But he starts singing Danny Boy, and the Reverend starts like freaking out, like, who is that? Did I leave the TV on? What's going on? And the Reverend says, oh my God, I thought, you're supposed to be dead. And he says, am I? Then what does that make you? Dreaming, perhaps? And then he, standing over the Reverend, he tells the Reverend, I want you to pray. And at just before he was walking up to him, we did get a little idea of what the Reverend was planning, because the Reverend is planning something next that the question may have to deal with in the next issue. And his plan in this issue was mentioned to be he's going to blow up a school bus because the owner of the line of buses has not been cooperating with him, perhaps in some monetary fashion, hasn't been paying him for something. And so he is planning on blowing up a school bus with children in it, by the way, I guess to give it a bigger effect on the news or whatever, to scare this bus owner. And so the question may have to address this in the next issue.
They also showed the Vietnam flashback thing of the Reverend again, right before the question sneaks up on
it. It does go into a little bit more detail about what the Reverend's motivations are. It touches on his origins in the Vietnam War a little bit more. His motivations seem to be that after seeing all the death and destruction and suffering in Vietnam, he cast off his understanding of religion and God. And he still believes in God, But his motivations at this point are that it seems like the world we live in is just a nightmare, and so I'm going to do everything in my power to make the world like such a bad place that God has no choice but to come down and address it.
That's an interesting premise, to be honest.
Right. This definitely highlights the Reverend's motivations a little bit more than the last one did, and I think it does flesh out his character a bit more because of that. So what did you think of issue 2?
I like issue 2 more. I don't think you need issue 1. I know we talked about that a little after you described some of issue 2 after issue 1, but now after you've gone through issue 2, if I hadn't read issue 1, they really do go over a lot of the issue 1 stuff. Especially with Batman hammering home the, like, he's arrogant stuff, because you could argue you would have missed seeing a lot of that if you hadn't read
You'd have a little bit
1.
less context for what Batman's talking about, but
you could get it. I mean, I'm not going to think
he's
Batman's lying.
He's giving you the context, more or less. I get what you mean. I think you really could either take the first issue or leave it. I do like how the first issue ends. Obviously, with the second issue starting where it does, you don't really get to experience that in the way that you would if you had read the build-up to him almost dying. But I do get what you're saying. This second issue kind of picks up with him being the question that you want to read about anyway. Because obviously the first issue, he wasn't, meant to be a very likable person. But yeah, that was the question number 2 by Denny O'Neil and Dennis Cowan. We'll get to maybe another issue in the future.
Thank you guys for watching.